Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Hello, everybody. Welcome here today. You are with AJU B'Yachad Together, spirited by American Jewish University. My name is Deb Engel Kollin, and I am the Relationship Manager for the Miller Introduction to Judaism program here at American Jewish University. We are going to get started in just a minute. I'm going to let some people come in, see you populating into our room, into our webinar here. I'm today with Asher Gellis and Arya Marvazy, who I'll introduce in just a minute. It's very exciting to be here together to have this discussion that is so important for everybody. So welcome, everybody. Again, my name is Deb Engel Kollin. I am the Relationship Manager for the Miller Introduction to Judaism program here at American Jewish University. And you are here together with Arya Marvazy and Asher Gellis, and we are going to have a discussion on the case for inclusion, why the embrace and equality of LGBTQ plus Jews matters more than ever. And this is one of the offerings from B'Yachad Together, and this is AJU's response to COVID, offering thought-provoking conversations. So today, I am thrilled to welcome Asher Gellis, who is the founder and executive director of JQ International, an LGBTQ plus and ally Jewish nonprofits that creates community through identity building programs, provides teen education and national support services and resources. Asher is a native of LA, and he'll actually tell a little bit more about his background. Arya Marvazy is also born and raised here in Tehran, as he likes to say. And Arya earned his BA in psychology at UCSD, has a master's in organizational behavior from NYU, and has spent many years in the nonprofit world, including at Hillel International. And he is also one of the most, the Jewish journals, I'll spotlight him in this one, LA Jewish Journal's 30 and under 30 list, and Iran Wire's 50 Iranian Americans you should know. So it is really, I am so thrilled to be in conversation with the two of you today. Before we begin, we're gonna have a discussion, and then we'll have some time, hopefully, for questions. We'll see. I have a lot planned, so we'll see how that looks, and then we'll wrap it up. So before I actually begin talking to the two of you and asking you some questions, I wanted to share with everyone why this topic is so important to me personally. 7 years ago, my then 12-year-old son came out to me as being gay. And for me, his being gay wasn't an issue. I was more worried about how our Jewish community would accept him and how he would be able to manage his Jewish and gay identities. This led me to a lot of research, personal growth, questions, and it led me to find JQ. And I'll say, for transparency's sake, I am on the board of JQ, but I got involved for very selfish reasons. I wanted to show my Yoni that I supported him in being gay, but what I learned and what I continue to learn is what has made me what I call today an accidental activist. So that's kind of how I got involved. So Asher, let's start with you. Why don't you share your story and why you started JQ in 2004?
Sure. Thank you, Deb. Thanks for having us. I was raised here in Los Angeles. I had an amazing bubble of Jewish experience, from Jewish day school to Jewish summer camp, USY Israel pilgrimage. I had amazing Jewish experience growing up, amazing Jewish role models. I really loved my Judaism and everything about it. But around age 12, I started to understand that I was different than the other kids around me, that I was wrestling with my own sexual orientation, even levels of like gender nonconforming issues. And I looked around, and while I had amazing Jewish role models, I didn't have any LGBTQ role models. And I really, unfortunately, I felt like I was the only gay Jew in the world. It's hard to imagine now, knowing the tens of thousands of gay and lesbian and trans Jews that I know, that I felt like I was the only one. But from around age 12 till I was probably around age 20, I was in a dark place. I was depressed. I never shared with anyone about my sexual orientation. And I suffered from a lack of feeling that there were role models that reflected where I could see myself as being a part of the Jewish community. And around age 20, I left the Jewish community behind to dive deep into a renaissance of identity around my gay identity. And I left feeling angry and upset with my Jewish upbringing, something that was so everything, an essence of everything I knew. And when I came out, after a couple of years of exploring my identity as a gay Jew, as a gay person, I started to miss the pieces of what it was growing up in the Jewish community, the tikkun olam, the cultural experiences, the generational social action, social justice, all of the educational pieces. And I desperately sought community, and I couldn't find it. And I could see my straight friends I grew up with had all these amazing programs for young adults, for them to potentially meet the love of their life. And then I saw gay culture where you were able to go to a club or a party or, an educational program even. But you felt like you had to leave your Jewish identity at the door, and kind of traditional elements were not respected or valued in the gay and lesbian community. And so unfortunately for me, I felt lost. And it wasn't until I found a few friends that were also gay Jews that we were able to just start hosting a couple of events, Shabbat dinners, a Hanukkah event, a toy drive, where I could bring those values of Jewish community back into my life. And we just invited anyone and everyone to come. And it didn't matter if they were gay or Jewish or whatnot. And after 4 events, the course of a year, we went from 3 or 4 people to 125. And Jakey was born.
Wow. Wow. Well, kol hakavod. Someone has to be the first to start, and amazing. Arya, tell us a little bit about your story, and maybe especially as it relates to being Persian.
Certainly. And thank you, Deb, so much again, and to the entire AJU community for this opportunity. I just want to take a very brief moment to mention that I'm standing in solidarity with African Americans around the world as it relates to the recent passing of George Floyd. I know that's something that's heavy on a lot of our hearts and minds, and I do want to send energy to our loved ones around the world. So I was born and raised in Los Angeles as well. As Deb mentioned, a member of Tehrangeles. This here in LA is the largest Persian Jewish population in the world, which also then, as a blessing, allows it to be one of the most diverse Persian Jewish communities in the world. My degrees, were leaning more in the direction of psychology and human resource management, but it just so happened that in undergrad at UC San Diego, my life as a student was so enriched by Hillel, and by that Jewish student life that Hillel was able to create for me, that I leaned in the direction of nonprofit work, also somewhat accidentally. It was never the career path that I envisioned I might pursue. And after getting my master's degree in organizational behavior, I did try the HR route. And frankly, it's a lot more lucrative than the nonprofit industry. But I found myself stopping in boardrooms and thinking, why am I here? What am I doing? I don't believe that this is why I was put on this earth. After so many meaningful years at Hillel at that point as well, I knew, and I came to really crystallize this sense that the areas of Jewish identity, Jewish community, and Jewish continuity are my bread and butter. They're what I love more than anything, and being in service, working in service of those values and things is what has driven my adult life. And so it just so happens that after an extended period of a decade away outside of Los Angeles, I can't say that that was because of my queerness, but there was a benefit to being outside of Los Angeles as I explored my LGBTQ self. Because, much like Asher's story shares, I looked around me through all stages of my life. I had no positive role models. And frankly, I would say that the the virality of the homophobia, the type of terminology, the types of things that I might hear at a Shabbat dinner. And mind you, I always say that for Iranian Jews, I do believe that Shabbat is as much our Torah as any other Torah value, because Shabbat keeps us so bound to one another. I was always given the message that my identity had no place. And so I had made this universe in my mind where coming out would mean being disowned and bringing much shame and harm to my family and loved ones, which I never wanted to do. And after having left DC and working for Hillel International, and I came to LA, I had the opportunity to come out to my parents. It was over Passover of 2015. I shared with them this vision, this goal of making this piece of LGBTQ, like the whole arena of LGBTQ inclusion, one of the great outputs of my life, something that I want to give my entire life to. And it was then right around that time that a dear friend, I believe it was Esther Kostanowitz first, that mentioned, you really got to hear about this JQ place. Asher and I had coffee in his parents' living room one night. One thing led to the next, and I found myself in this incredible organization that was the exact intersection of every passion and skill set and resource that I would want to bring to the broader Jewish world. And today, when it comes to the Persian piece, and I really give major kudos to JQ as an organization for having taken this risk, it is in many ways one of the only organizations in the world with such a said focus on the Persian queer experience, which does lend itself more broadly to the Middle Eastern Jewish queer experience. And so much as there are stigmas and additional work to be done towards our greater equality, we're doing amazing work, and I'm proud to be part of it.
I'm going to hit on that a little bit more after, but I'm going to come back to Asher now. Asher, how has the landscape and the Jewish community changed towards LGBTQ plus issues since you started JQ 16 years ago? And do you see your work as groundbreaking to other marginalized Jews?
Well, first, I'd love to give a shout out to Beth My Machine, BCC. They were the first gay and lesbian, later to be LGBTQ synagogue, founded here in Los Angeles in the 70s. And without that pioneering work, we as an organization wouldn't have a lot to stand on. So even before JQ was formed, there were activists and organizations doing advocacy work. I think how JQ was different is that while we're not a congregation per se, but we're an organization where individuals can meet one another, get education, provide support, get support, and feel a part of a broader trans-denominational and post-denominational community. But just thinking back 16 years ago, to what the landscape looked like, there was just a lot of hostility towards the gay and lesbian community. And I have to say that, when we founded JQ, we ended up getting a lot of harassing or even threats against us from individuals in the community. It was a very different time for us in the life of being a gay and lesbian in the United States, let alone in the Jewish community. But in the early years, when we developed critical mass of young adults, we realized that we all had the same story of not having these role models. And so we wanted to be those role models for change. And so we started knocking on the doors of the congregations, the Jewish organizations around town, and we wanted to do storytelling and sharing coming out stories, our parents' stories. And in the early years, we had to do our program in front of the clergy and the administration. And then if they approved it, then we'd have to do it in front of the youth commission. And then if they approved it, a letter would have to go home to the parents, and maybe a quarter of the kids would show up because the parents didn't want their kids exposed to the content. Even though we were never talking about sex, we were just talking about love and inclusion. It was still a very hostile response that we would get. And in the years since, we have continued to pound the pavement, and now we can't keep up with the number of synagogues that want to work with us, the number of institutions that want our stories to be told. And we feel very blessed. While we've made great strides, there is a lot more work that has to be done. And I will say that, like, in the early years, it was a lot more questions about 1822 in Leviticus and very literal interpretations around sexual orientation and homosexuality being forbidden, the conversation has evolved. And it's evolved wrapped around a blanket of Jewish values of B'Tselem Elohim, in God's image, Kol Yisrael Arvim Ze B'Zeh, we all responsible for one another, and creating the positive, affirming Jewish community that we want to have. That has fortunately pushed down the more simpler and caustic realities that we experienced in the early years. And I would say also, in terms of, understanding inclusion, when we do inclusion work in the community, it is not just about LGBTQ, it is also about thinking about the different communities that are marginalized and left out of the spaces. And it's just the same as when, a gay or lesbian community member goes onto a website and looks for a welcoming, a welcoming page on the website around LGBTQ inclusion is no different than an individual who, hears from a congregation that everyone is welcome, yet they're in a wheelchair and there's no ramp for them to get up to a bima. So the concept of inclusion is one that can be expanded across all the entire spectrum of the mosaic of what our community looks like. Deb, you're on mute.
Yes, I am. I knew that was going to happen. Thank you, Asher. It's so interesting because, I got involved so much later, and both you and Arya mentioned having no role models really in your communities. And, what a blessing it has become because my Yoni has role models now. So that's amazing. So I just want to ask all our participants to put your questions in the Q&A forum rather than the chat function, so we'll look at those at the end. So thank you. Okay, Arya, I have another question for you. So we live in a very Ashkenormative society, and you represent a triple intersectionality identity of queer, Jewish, and Persian. Can you share what your experience has been and how that has motivated your leadership in opening the doors for others who are marginalized, and what examples the broader Jewish community may apply to inclusion in their organizations and institution?
Absolutely. Thank you, Deb. And I guess just to make a point about Asher's response, those same instances, and it speaks to the title of this session about the case for inclusion today, those same instances of us going to an institution and having an opportunity to do an educational program, or for that matter, a Jewish institution in Los Angeles choosing to bring young adults to JQ, has seen similar hesitation from parents. Just last summer, we had a session about it was just meant to be Jewish leaders, and two of us as JQ employees were going to tell our leadership journeys, and 50% of the class had their parents choose not to send their kids to school that day, rather than have their children come and hear about Jewish leadership from two LGBTQ people at JQ. So I have to emphasize the point that we have come an enormously long way, but as Asher mentioned, there's so much ahead of us. So the topic of Ashkenormativity, and I remember first hearing that term when I was at Hillel International, and I finally felt like, yeah, like they gave a name to this, like this is what it is, that everybody assumes that this is how you do Judaism, and these are the songs, and these are the rituals, and this is what the community looks like, and this is what Shabbat dinner should be, and this is what the Rosh Hashanah and Passover and Sukkot, and it was this sense of, well, I'm so richly connected to my Persian identity, and my Persian identity is so inextricably bound to my Judaism that having grown up with only the Persian Jewish version of Judaism, I was actually shocked to see what Ashkenazi Jewish life was. And then I had to sort of adjust to, okay, well, this is a really powerful and beautiful world, and truly bless the incredible leaders that came to this country and established the beyond century-old institutions that have made up Jewish life, right? But what we recognize, and what I think Hillel actually, I'll give them this credit, recognized, I don't know what the exact timeline was, but certainly in my time with them 12 years ago plus, this sense that, we are not going to be a one flavor for all Jewish life and Jewish community. That would make us irrelevant. And it's interesting to pinpoint that thought. The only reason I was actually engaged with Hillel and then it decided to expand my involvement was because they had created something called the Campus Entrepreneurs Initiative. They gave Jewish young adults a budget and parameters and said, show us Jewish life your way. And I got to create JOPA, the Jewish Organization for Persians and Americans, with my cousin Debbie at UC San Diego. I believe it's still there on the campus, and teach about Mizrahi and Sephardi Judaism. And that brought such a diverse audience into our campus, Hillel, and enriched the experience for all of us. That is to say, when we talk about inclusion today, certainly far beyond just the subject of LGBTQ identity, we think about, I think in particular, Jews of color as one major arena where we want to be doing better work about not just welcoming and embracing, but actually identifying the numbers that are Jews of color within our communities today. And there are several different organizations that work on this subject day in and day out, but the Jews of Color Field Building Initiative did a statistical study. I believe it was comprehensive data over the years of 2013 to 2019. And the estimation was, their best estimation was that Jews of color represent at least 12 to 15% of American Jews. And with that said, there is a whole thought process and system by which an institution might consider making a Jew of color making a Jew of color feel welcome in those spaces. So I guess to speak to the Ashken normativity bit and the inclusion piece, I want to get at this point. We have had a trend in the Jewish world, and not without goodwill and intention, of doing really powerful things. Say, for example, a Moroccan breakfast, or a Pride Shabbat, or a Jews of color panel, or something that ends up leaning in the direction of diversity, and then sitting back and feeling really good about being inclusive. And all I want to say is that that work is relevant and valuable and good and meaningful. But we've got to go many, many steps further than that. It has to be systemic. The ways in which we communicate, we welcome, if we do, interfaith families, Jews of color, queer people, LGBTQ people, Jews of differing abilities. It has to be a part of an organizational culture, and that's a discussion far longer than this session, but those are the ways that we think about the subject of LGBTQ inclusion as JQ and as an institution, and we would like to see replicated, and I think some are doing it greatly, namely I'd just say ICAR in Los Angeles, on those broader layers of inclusion.
Wow, thank you. That's a lot to take in and to think about. Maybe I would say to take that further in terms of what's the difference between when someone says they think they're inclusive, and I'm looking at one of the questions when we say we're inclusive, but how do we really mean it? And how do we show that on our websites in person? How are we really showing the difference, besides just having this one-off panel?
Right. I can speak to this. Or Ash, do you want me to? Okay. Well, so we have a whole sort of checklist of considerations and cultural shifts that we would invite institutions and organizations to make as they consider the conversation about, say, LGBTQ inclusion, but could be made parallel to other different minority communities. And these are things as broad and as big as your mission and vision statements as an organization, down to the Jewish and organizational or institutional values that you communicate to congregants or students or campers, pending what form of Jewish institution we're looking at. It does certainly touch on a recognition of and celebration of LGBTQ life that may intersect with Jewish life, but may also be separate. Say, for example, there is National Coming Out Day in the fall each year. When we have a really powerful institution that is saying we include our members, it's true that that's not a Jewish holiday, but it is a powerful opportunity for a Jewish community to say, for all of those that have come out and for all of those that are still struggling in the closet, we want to mention that we care, we love you, we stand firmly with you, and your equality matters to us. And it then bleeds into all layers of institutional policy, even down to the forms that someone might fill out, whether to sign themselves up as a family affiliated with an institution, or for their children as campers or students at a Hebrew school, for example. So we have moved, interestingly enough, over the course of 15 years from inclusion training to inclusion consultation. And the consultation is 3, 6, 9, 12 months and beyond, rather than what might have happened in the past, which was we did your 2-hour inclusion training. Thanks so much. Maybe we'll tap you in a couple of years. And I know Asher will definitely add to this.
Well, first of all, you did a great job. What I would like to add, and I think is really relevant, considering how the landscape has evolved, is that at least from understanding measurements of success, I can't tell you how many times I've walked into Jewish institutions and I'm greeted by the clergy or administration, and they tell me how inclusive their institution is. And I know that these individuals I'm sitting across the table from are allies, and they care about the LGBTQ community or other marginalized communities. They want everyone to feel that they have a place at the table. But it's also very easy for me to ask them questions like you pointed to earlier. Do you have a welcoming page on your website? Do you have an inclusion policy statement? Have you done training with your educators on creating safe space? Do you have, I can ask a basket of 10 questions, and routinely I get no, 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 no. And so when you're sitting across the table from an ally and someone who wants to help, it can be challenging to wrestle with this reality, but we have to guide them through a process to help them understand the steps that they need to put into action to create the inclusive environment that they seek to have without making them feel deflated around it. And yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Okay. Arya, and it's a question I have, and it's actually someone in the Q&A asked, has the current pandemic affected the state of LGBTQ inclusion, health? How is it?
Right. So thank you for that. I think it's such an important question as we consider sort of how are different minority communities impacted by COVID. And I want to name a misconception and clarify it before answering. One is that there is a reality where the LGBTQ community experiences more issues with mental health and more experiences of mental health complications within our community. And some people have gone as far as to say, well, that has to do with the decision of, like, to be a queer person or to act on one's queer identity. And we know factually, and this comes from every respectable medical psychiatric organization across the planet, that this is, of course, a naturally occurring part of the human experience. It is not a disease. It is not to be treated. It is not to be, subjected to any sort of unequal treatment as just a part of the human experience. That being said, as much as the LGBTQ community, and in particular youth, experience harassment or repression or oppression of one's identity, the manifestation of depression, anxiety, and different other mental health complications are going to occur in higher numbers. So with that as a foundation to build upon, now that we have LGBTQ young adults, and community members locked at home, and without the capacity both to gather in inclusive and supportive communities and or to seek the safe spaces that they would have given for many people, and I really want to name this, home is not always the safest place. And that is not to say that I am communicating every LGBTQ person is, God forbid, at the risk of domestic violence or abuse. I'm actually just saying, even by virtue of not having one's identity acknowledged by siblings or parents or housemates or peers, you are in a truly hostile reality. I mean, you have to just try and think to yourself, what does it feel like to suggest the people that I have dinner with every night, the people that I am saying good morning and good night to, don't accept me. They don't understand my identity. They don't know where I'm coming from. So there is a slew of efforts. Certainly JQ, I mean, I give so many kudos to our broader team to have turned around the outputs of this organization as quickly as we did, because we knew this was exactly what was going to happen. And what we've seen is an uptick in emails and phone calls to the JQ helpline, in outreach to just the colleagues in the JQ community to say, this is my situation, please, what can you do? The other institutions, I'd say, just that are sort of worthy of mention, but that come to mind, are LGBTQ centers on college campuses across America have sort of dove in immediately to make their programs and services available for students that would have been on campus and would have had access because they were away from home, but are now, in the scenario where they might be experiencing an inhospitable home life and can't share their queerness. And that is to say all of the LGBTQ organizations, and kudos to all of the LGBTQ Jewish organizations, like Keshet and Jewish Queer Youth and Eshel and our other partners that do this work with us, that all stepped in to say, now is our time to be the most relevant as ever, right? The fact that people can't access us in person actually puts more people in harm's way. And that's also just the uniqueness of this experience for people within our community.
Thank you so much for that. Let me ask a question. How have you worked with some of the different communities within the Jewish community in terms of the Orthodox community, or, which has been a little bit more closed on these issues? Can you speak to that? And have you seen a change in that community?
Yeah.
We've had the privilege of working with organizations like Eshel to build out Orthodox specific response in Los Angeles, to work both with the community members directly, but also with the Orthodox Jewish institutions. And I know that Arya works much more closely with our Orthodox support group and our Orthodox specific programming, so I definitely would love to have him add to this. But what I can tell you is that over the years, it started with a lot of very challenging and awkward conversations. I never felt there was a door closed to me from anyone leadership in the Orthodox community, but there was just, lots of listening, which was really great, but not a lot of movement. However, we have seen in the last couple of years, there has been some movement. There is a lot more to do, a lot more to make sure that our community members are being recognized for their simcha, their experiences, and being called to the bima and whatnot. That advocacy work has a lot of room to grow and continue in. And Arya, please, add and speak about our program.
Sure. I think, within the Orthodox community, and it's worthy of mention that as Asher and I speak as two cisgender gay men about LGBTQ life, there are so many individuals from within the other parts of our community that can speak more truthfully to their experience, and I defer to them to do so. What I've acknowledged as a non-Orthodox person in serving that community is that, again, the repetition of sort of an oppression, a denial, and a repression of self has lent many individuals to a sense that the two identities, meaning Orthodoxy and Judaism, cannot coexist. And now having a space by which to even discuss rediscovering the fusion of those two identities has been one of the most powerful outcomes of our work in that arena. And I think to speak more broadly on this conversation around partnerships, that's one of the strategies that our organization, and I think any, could really take from the Jewish institutional world when we think about how might we work towards greater inclusion in the most broad sense. It doesn't have to be us doing that work alone. It doesn't have to be us finding the consultant and figuring it out for our institutions alone. Let's do this as cross-pollinations and collaborations and build between and amongst ourselves to do the best inclusion work. And some of the things that come to mind are, in the past 5 years alone, we've done this incredible collaboration with One Table, which helps Jewish young adults celebrate Shabbat at home and gives them a subsidy to do so in creating a Pride Shabbat resource kit. We're going into our 3rd year of launching that, and it gets better every year. And that allows sort of that angle of the Shabbat life. And another incredible collaboration that took us more into the international spaces with the Joint Distribution Committee's Entwine program, which takes young adults to Jewish NGOs around the world, which they support, to cultivate a greater sense of global Jewish responsibility. To do an LGBTQ leadership trip series with them helps that entire movement become more inclusive. So partnerships as a strategy is in and of itself really a robust arena for us to be exploring as Jewish institutions.
I think it's so important because we do want to, if we think about, or I think about the idea of Kol Yisrael Arvim Ze Bazeh, I also know that I can't do it all. I have maybe one specific thing that I can be really good at, maybe two, but I know working together with other people will bring other talents and challenge me to think differently, which is what I always want to be doing, to challenge my own beliefs, to grow and think in new and different ways. Asher, You started this organization, what, 14 years ago, 15 years ago now? In 10 years, where do you see yourselves? How would you measure success? How do you think Judaism is going to change because of the work that you're doing? I'm going to push this a little.
That's good. Look, Judaism has to evolve. There are a number of people that have been left outside of the tent that are not sitting at the table. The Jewish community has become aware of that in the recent history. We are making great efforts towards, making sure interfaith couples are not being left out. There's a lot more work that has to go into that space. But we as a community are an evolving people. We have been for thousands of years. We will continue to evolve. It's the values at the core of who we are that really guide who we are and the way that we propel ourselves into the future. Making sure that everyone has a seat at the table and that we don't fall back to, one size fits all, is really a fundamental for our community as we look to the future. There's a lot of changes happening in our world right now, just in this reality of this pandemic, and the way that we're able to meet and be a communal people. That's definitely ingrained in our DNA to be a communal people. But we have to think about how we can make sure everyone has a seat at the table, everyone has a voice at the table, they're not just tolerated, but that they are an active participant and valued and celebrated for their uniqueness. And for me, what I see the Jewish community, I can't believe how far the Jewish community has gone in the last 15 years. I also never thought I'd see gay marriage in this country. So we have made great strides and we've made a lot of progress. But I can see a lot more LGBTQ couples with their families engaged in Jewish life when we make sure that they are not just tolerated in the space. And when I say tolerated, it's where I feel we kind of, for the most part, are, where it's like, you're okay, you do you. But if you really want to be inclusive, we need to understand what your unique talents are, what you bring to the table, what's special, how can we celebrate you? And that goes across the board of inclusion towards any marginalized community and figuring out how to do that. 50 years ago, we had 3 channels and 3 movements of Judaism. Now we have thousands of channels of television or even streaming or wherever you are, and we have thousands of ways of being Jewish. And the new evolution of what it's going to look like to be Jewish is to figure out how all of this sort of dynamic reality can work together. And organizations are out there, are doing that, making that change. We're thrilled to be a part of that. But again, as Arya mentioned, we can't do this in a bubble. It's all about teamwork and building relationships, strengthening allies, mobilizing allies. But I can see us as a community with thriving, marginalized individuals who felt they were at the periphery of our reality as it is now, that in 10 years from now, feel like they're equally at the center with everyone else.
Deb, if I can add, I just will offer, Asher, thank you so much for that. I think it was so poignantly expressed. There's this other piece around sometimes, well, certainly in the nonprofit sector, there is this mindset of we'd love to put ourselves out of business. That universe where LGBTQ inclusion and the full embrace and uplifting and celebration of LGBTQ Jews as a rich part of Jewish life is so normative that, there's no longer the need for JQ. I don't know if that'll happen in our lifetime, but I want to say a piece that I think speaks to what will be in my mind and heart, one of the greatest catalysts towards a future we aspire to in a decade. And that is that the people on this call and everyone else who ever watches this internalizes our definition of allyship, and that one that we use very broadly around allyship being defined by action. If you are a supporter of the LGBTQ community, you do believe and you do love equally and you do say it and you do mean it. And that's also great. And I don't want to say anything negative about you. But to take it from support to allyship, that shift of, and I acted, and I spoke to my synagogue about it, and I signed a petition to fight for equal rights, and I realized that trans individuals who were banned from the military for a certain reason deserve the right to serve our country just like anyone else. And any output of active engagement in the fight for equality would get us to a place that we could never get to alone as LGBTQ people in 10 years. So I just want to say, it's not this crystal image. It's more just when we say, God willing, when we say LGBTQ and allied Jewish community in 10 years, we mean the entire Jewish community. because it's the LGBTQ people and the people who actively care about and work towards the equality of those people all together.
Thank you. Asher, what is the biggest challenge to this work?
Well, I mean, the easiest thing to say is the funding, but there's limited resources and a lot of work. But really, I say that the challenge to this work, for me personally, is the evolving vocabulary. I'm an educator on the subject. Arya is a phenomenal educator on the subject, and we go out and we do trainings and workshops, and we help people understand the alphabet of like LGBTQIQQ, GNC, and many other letters that were left out. And it's evolving. The vocabulary is evolving. The vocabulary was built originally around binary taxonomic reality of either A or B. And as we're evolving, we're understanding that sexual orientation, gender identity are fluid. They're not just a spectrum. They move around during an individual's development, and their development can be their entire life. We're always growing and evolving human beings. But to be able to keep up with the vocabulary and understand, there's those individuals that don't want a label because labels belong on a can. And then there's individuals who need the label to feel validated and to understand how they can identify themselves. And then, we have a new generation of youth coming out. They aren't really coming out. It's an evolving, very flexible, fluid thing. And I see a lot of the frustration amongst community members and allies in our community who want to feel they have the knowledge and are empowered and can really feel that they're very confident with the vocabulary and all of this sort of evolving understandings. And even myself as a person on the front line doing this education, it's a challenge for me to keep up with all of it.
Yeah, and I would echo that. I told everyone about my son who came out as gay. My son 3 years ago came out as non-binary, and their preferred pronouns are they and them. And so that led me on a whole new journey of understanding what does that mean, what is non-binary, how do I use that when I I now say my child. I do make mistakes because for 15, 16 years, they were a he's a son, but they want to be a they. And so I want to respect that and love that and want them to be whoever they're going to be. As long as, of course, they're good Jews, active Jews, involved Jews. I don't want too much. But right, so I'm still learning, right? And as a parent, I'm still learning. And in this journey, I'm hoping to keep learning, right? And to be pushed because it wasn't an easy thing to accept. And so I don't, while I'm coming across here, all of, very supportive, and I am very supportive, that's not saying that I also didn't struggle as a parent with this. Mm-hmm. And I think to understand that it's not a simple issue on any sense, and that it's something that is complicated and there aren't necessarily easy answers. I'm looking at some of these other questions. Some of them you actually you covered, but one of the questions that I think is really interesting is, what do you think are primary barriers that prevent congregations or other organizations from adopting certain measures that you described, like welcoming statements, training? Is it ignorant, resistance? Do you have any idea of what that is, and how we as a community, and I'd make this to the broader statement too, mm-hmm. In terms of inclusiveness, is it too PC? Do you get pushback? That was another question. Mm-hmm. This is just, PC.
Certainly on the front of gender identity and fluidity subject matter, we get a lot of pushback, but I think one of the largest challenges is for these institutions is there's a certain way things have been done for a very long time. They see that there's been progress that looks like amazing progress, like gay marriage and whatnot, that's happening in the world around them. And they don't really necessarily understand that they aren't inclusive. They don't understand that they're mostly tolerant. And so it's sort of a big step for them to understand that sort of next level of what it takes to be a more embracing environment. Dr. Joel Kushner created an amazing tool that we use that helps to narrate the trajectory of moving from hostile to embracing. It's an amazing eye-opening tool that allows people to see what are the steps necessary and where they actually are and where they might like to go. But I think within the institutional space, they're competing over limited resources. They're all nonprofits, and most of them are struggling. The synagogue model, or most nonprofits or Jewish organizations, are struggling. They have a finite budget, and it's very hard sometimes to make big expenditures to support larger inclusion efforts. It's a cost-benefit analysis, and sometimes it can seem very large and at times overpowering what it would take to actually make the change. So and it's more of like a systemic, sort of priorities around funding and where the funds are being spent. Also a trajectory of like, this is how it's always been. Why are we making changes?
Yeah, Joel Kushner, our friend, actually alluded to that in the chat box as well. So are there any final words that you would want to share before we end this conversation that I don't want to end, but we all have to
already? That was so fast. I guess I'd love to just to say, with all of the competing things that we could be doing, namely Netflix and chilling on our couches, thank you for taking the time and energy to be with us tonight and to just explore this conversation with us. We are more than eager to offer additional, time and energy and resources and efforts to have this conversation with individuals or communities or institutions. But I really want to name this one piece, at least for my final thought, that, sometimes people fear or are nervous around the term activist. Like I couldn't be an activist too. That means then everything has to be perfect in my mind, and then I have to know it all and be able to defend it all and all the rest. Ally, where you are capable of saying, I don't know everything, but I will do my best at any moment to support. And when I don't know something, I will comfortably admit, hey, I don't know about that piece around this concept of gender queerness or non-binariness, or even the use of the term queer, which, by the way, is just a collective catch-all for LGBTQ people, to step into that allyship with a sense of comfort that we as LGBTQ people appreciate you and thank you for your efforts that are rooted in compassion and love and a desire for equality for all of us. And that can really move our entire community forward. So thank you.
love you. Asher.
Immense gratitude for being welcomed into this space. I would say for final thoughts that for me, I think storytelling is one of the most important and provocative ways that we can make change in our community. There are so many stories. We have so many stories, from coming out stories to being a parent to coming out as an ally in support of an LGBTQ community member. And the more we tell these stories, the more dynamic and understanding can be felt. And I encourage each and every one of you to inquire, if you have a gay or lesbian, trans, anyone in your life that's fits under the blanket of queer, ask them their coming out story. Ask them what their experience has been like. Don't just engage with them and not know their story and not welcome the storytelling that can take place that can really change hearts and minds. And we've seen that. And I encourage each and every one of you to reach out to your institutions and ask them to bring us a speaker for a Devar Torah to the community to share about their experience and their Judaism and their Torah and whatnot. So again, thank you so much for having us. It's been an amazing experience to be here and participate in this.
Thank you both so much. And again, I want to say that the work you've done has made a tremendous difference in my life personally, my child's life. As I joke, what do I want from Yoni? I never wanted him to choose between being Jewish and being gay. We are all so many different identities, right? I'm Jewish, I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a parent, I'm a friend. But when you're young, sometimes you forget and you see things only as a one one thing. And so it was really important for me that Yoni didn't have to make that choice. And because of you guys and JQ and just your leadership and taking on that role of being a role model, my child was able to now be, you know, goes to Hillel in drag and in college, right? Because that's who Yoni is, and is just so comfortable and confident in who they are as a human being. So I thank you for that. I want to really say that 45 minutes isn't enough for a conversation like this, right? This is a complicated issue. We just, you know, to bring this to the front, the purpose really to know that we're not alone. You're not alone. People listening to this isn't alone. We are really, there are so many resources out there for people besides JQ. There are the gay and lesbian synagogues. There's Savara, which, you know, we couldn't have known would exist, which is a queer place for limud study, right? And I'm sure that if people are feeling some inner contradictions, I know I still struggle with a lot of things, that we're not alone, right? This is an ongoing process and evolution. And I would say one thing I just want to add, right? When I was growing up, you didn't say queer, right? That was not a term that was used. And yet now the queer community has reclaimed it, and it's used, and proudly, right? So, right, things change, and it takes getting used to. So I want to thank you guys again. I want to thank AJU and the platform of B'Yachad, spearheaded by AJU, to really allow us to have this conversation, to bring up these challenging issues, to provoke us into more thinking. We have many, many other fabulous offerings coming up. I invite people to look at our website, at aju.edu, B'Yachad together, to look and see some of the interesting and diverse offerings that we have. So we have offerings coming up next week for parents on how to turn your home into summer camps. Sadly, so many of our summer camps are not going to be meeting. How to tell the story of Israel. Will financial crisis lead to the growth of anti-Semitism? Taking a journey with no destination. There are so many more amazing sessions coming up. So I invite people to come again and you know, come back again and again and again, and keep learning, keep challenging yourselves. Come back to us with questions. We appreciate it so very much. Thank you all for being with us tonight, and stay safe, everybody, and happy Shavuot for the holiday that's coming up. And I'm really, really thrilled that we were able to have this conversation today. Thank you.